Yeah, so once I got local permission, which took about 2, 3 months, that wasn't all, that wasn't especially difficult. I then started interacting with the DEA and then the FDA as well, kind of at the same time. Um, yeah, and if somebody is going to be given any experimental drug, even melatonin, which I had previously studied, it requires this thing called an investigational new drug or IND permit, um, and it's just a simple two-page form. You include a copy of your protocol, which had been approved at the university level. And then it's just like a very short two-page form, and it has written on the bottom, if you don't hear from us within a month, you can start. So I said, oh, this should be easy. So I filled out the paperwork, but I wasn't under any illusion that within a month I would be given permission. I first had to find somebody to make the DMT for me. I had to get my Schedule 1 permit from the DEA, all those kinds of things. But still, I mean, as expected, at the 20, within 28, days of submitting the paperwork, I got a call from FDA, and they said, well, we have some questions, and so we'll get back to you. Yeah, and so then began about a 2-year process of phone calls and letters and faxes. There wasn't much email at the time. This was 1988. Yes, well, I began working with FDA in September of 1988, and I finally got the permission to begin in November of 1990. So it was over, slightly over a 2-year process. Yeah. So it's such a Byzantine story. It's just it just makes me break out in a sweat thinking about it. Yeah. It was a very strange combination of forces resisting me. There was ignorance. There was fear. There was political, questions. And there were ethical questions, probably spiritual ones that were perhaps more or less unconscious on the part of the people that were looking at the protocol. Like, is this good from a spiritual or religious point of view? Is this the work of the devil that this guy's going to be getting into, or what? I mean, obviously, those are the kinds of issues that contributed, I think, to some of the squashing of this work in the 1960s. Unconscious or even conscious, religious sorts of questions, and there were the more political ones and ethical ones, and toxicology ones, all that kind of thing. Um, it had been 20 years since anybody had submitted a request to study psychedelics in humans in the States. And there was a lot of red tape that had just kind of, grown up around giving Schedule 1 compounds to people in the intervening 20 years. Um, what had stopped all the studies in the late 1960s and early 1970s was this act which was called the Controlled Substances Act. And it was that piece of law that placed all of the psychedelics into Schedule 1. And, so DMT was placed into Schedule 1 at that time as well. Yeah, and so it became very hard to do those studies because the paperwork was inordinate, and so everybody just kind of gave up doing the work at that time. But I figured, well, this is going to be a long haul, but I'll just learn as much as I can about how to do Schedule 1 work. What is the requirement? What paperwork do they need? What kind of animal data do they need? What kind of toxicology? What kind of chemistry? All those things. So it was an interesting, progression of the hierarchy of the FDA and of the DEA. Obviously, I began working with people who didn't know much about what I was asking. So they would respond to my request as if I was a drug company that was looking at a new drug, to market. And so that took about 3 months, to convince them that I was just an individual. I was not a drug company. I just wanted to study 12 people rather than 1,000 or 10,000. Um, yeah, and so I don't think it was a malignant intent on the part of these agencies to keep me from doing it, but I think they just wanted to throw everything that they could at me to make it, to slow me down and to really make sure that I knew what I was doing, or that it seemed that I knew what I was doing, and I had everything in place, and I had the safeguards, and that I was able to persist in that long regulatory sort of process. So I worked my way through the FDA bureaucracy. Fortunately, the divisions at FDA had changed around a bit in response to the AIDS crisis. It was quite slow getting any new compound through the FDA, kind of regulatory, situation. And as a result of complaints from the AIDS community, they had begun a new division at the food and I'm at the FDA, and it was called the pilot drug division, and so this new division within the FDA was so this new division within the FDA was intended to kind of fast track experimental and new drugs, and so fortunately my request didn't end up in the same division as my MDMA request had landed a few years previously, and the people in this new division were so the people in this new division were interested in things taking place a lot more quickly than otherwise was the case previously. So I went through a number of levels of the FDA bureaucracy, and I ended up, finally, one day speaking with another physician. Everyone else was either a high school graduate or a college graduate or like a master's level person, kind of, take 3 months of interacting with a high school graduate, 3 years, 3 months interacting, with a person with a college degree, 3 months interacting with someone with some graduate training, and then I finally ended up speaking to a MD at FDA, and this guy was really friendly. He was really helpful. He said, I've been keeping an eye on this for the last year, and I'm here to help. So I breathed a huge sigh of relief. Like, finally, I have a colleague who's open-minded and wants to, see this thing go through. And he was very clear. He said, expect a letter within the next few weeks. It's going to be a very dense, single-spaced letter. It's going to stipulate 20 things, 25 things that you're going to have to go through in order to get this off the ground. And he said, I'll help you with everyone. So it was like, great. This is like, a complete opening as opposed to just being stymied basically every step of the way. It was an interesting kind of process. As compared to my MDMA study request, where they flatly just told me no. These guys with the people that were overlooking my study with DMT, they never really told me no. They just said, well, you have to do this or you have to do that. And the kinds of requests that they were making of me most of the time were completely nonsensical and weren't appropriate. But they never told me no. they just said, well, you have to do this and you have to do that. And I couldn't, and so I'd call them back and I would say, I can't do this because I'm not doing that. Yeah, and so after like about a year of that, I finally ended up speaking with the person who then agreed to be helpful and really spelled out exactly the things that I had to do. Um, yeah, and so a few weeks after that, I got this incredibly densely worded letter stating all of the steps that were required. But once I got those steps taken care of, then I could go ahead and do it.